So you've got a new Apple computer. Maybe it's your first time, maybe you've just upgraded, but one thing that you notice right away are how strange things are when moving around in the Mac. Most notably for most people is the mouse. It doesn't behave the way you're used to. Whether you're coming from Windows or whether you've had Macs before and you've set these preferences, you remember that out of the box, these preferences don't really suit me. I know this is how it goes for me. So the first thing I do is I go and I customize a lot of features about the operating system. It helps my workflow, makes everything more familiar to me. Let's check out some of these settings. So out of the box, there's no secondary click, which is what we think of as a right click. You can click all day long and you don't get your context menu. But when we turn this on, now when you right click, you get your context menu. This happens throughout the operating system and apps. The other thing that I found foreign right away was when scrolling, everything went backwards to me, what I was used to. So I found that setting is this scroll direction natural. When I turned that off, it felt far more familiar to me. Things moved the way I expected when scrolling. I also set my tracking speed. This is how quickly the mouse will move. It comes a little slow out of the box for my preferences. I raised it so that it doesn't take so much movement to go from left to right on the screen. You may find that also helpful. And the last thing that I do when I will turn on the swipe between pages. When you're browsing or several other apps accept this feature, you can flip back and forth between pages. So if you're looking at a website and you want to go back one page, you just swipe to the left or to the right with one finger. It's a very helpful gesture. Try it out. You may like that one as well. I generally turn mission control off, which is a double tap with two fingers. I use hot corners, and I'm going to show you how to do that as well. There's one other thing that pertains to the mouse as well as how you look at things on screen. There's zooming, and you can zoom with several different methods using the mouse. My favorite is under accessibility and then zoom. I like to turn on this scroll gesture. I got used to this right away. I think it was default in some earlier versions of the operating system, and then it kind of changed to where it wasn't, so I found I had to go and turn it back on. I could be mistaken there, but in any event, I always like to turn this on, and what this does, especially if you're using a small screen and you don't want to change the font size, because changing the font size makes all of the apps a little, their geometry is changed when you do that. You have to scroll more to see things. Some apps don't render it very well when you change the font size. I generally will leave my font size alone, and then whenever I need to see something that's too small, if you hold the control key down and scroll with the center of the mouse, you can bring everything closer to you. I use this very often. When you zoom in, if you need to scroll, you don't even have to look for a scroll handle. You just move the mouse to one side of the screen, or top or bottom, to find the area of the screen that you're looking for. And then as long as you're not at the edge of the screen, it won't scroll. But when you want it to, I find it quite intuitive. Just hold the control key down and scroll back on the mouse, and it'll go right back to zoomed fully out. It's very quick. That's what I like about it, because oftentimes I find that full screen viewing is great, but there's one specific piece that I want to look at. I will just zoom in and do what I need to do, and then zoom back out. Very efficient for me, so I like that setting. Okay, some settings for the dock. Out of the box, the dock stays on the screen all the time, which costs you a little bit of screen real estate. If you have a window open and you want to maximize it, the dock kind of takes up this space down here, and you can't size the window down. This is a default setting. Up under System Preferences. The dock has its own category here. A couple of things that I like to do. I like to have it hide. You click Automatically Hide and Show. That way you move the mouse down to the screen and the dock comes up when you need it. You can then size your windows to occupy the entire screen. Also, some things I like to do with the dock. I like to change the size just a little bit. It's a little small, and you can customize this where you like it. I don't like the recent applications showing on the dock because it changes constantly, and I like things to be kind of more stable. Don't really have a need to have it show me what I've used recently. So I turn that off here. Okay, and I like the magnification for when you are looking for your icons. It helps you find where your mouse is, and it's just kind of a cool effect, so I turn that on. The other thing I do is I like to have the applications, the downloads, and the documents present on the dock. Now you can add icons to the dock at any time. If you bring up Finder window, and for example, applications, documents, and downloads are all here in the sidebar of the Finder window. You can just drag that down onto the dock, and it'll be there all the time. It doesn't take it out of the sidebar here, but it also adds it to the dock. The other thing I do is I like these custom icons for applications, downloads, and documents. If you don't use custom icons, they change constantly based on what the contents of those folders are. So applications, I have got a special icon here that shows up, and it looks like a drawer holding up all of the applications. The same thing with downloads and documents. I found those years ago, and the only place I can really find them anymore is here on DeviantArt. You can download this file, and you just drop the appropriate icon into the corresponding folder to have them show up when you leave these on here. That way my icons aren't changing based on the contents of those folders. I believe the way they make them always show is if you look at the name of these icons, there's a space, there's a leading space, and the contents of the directories are alphabetized. So by putting a space in front of it, it causes it to always be the first icon, which shows up, gives it some persistence here in the icon in the dock. And that's the changes that I like to make to the dock to make it more personalized to my preferences. Another item I wanted to go over with you is the concept of desktop spaces. It's a little new to a Windows user. There are some applications there that can give the same functionality, although they're not default, so a lot of people are unaware of them. Linux users have been using this method for years, and Mac, it's also quite common on a Mac. So right now we're looking at one desktop. You have one wallpaper and you've configured everything, and when you open an application it comes up on that desktop. However, we can have multiple desktops. In order to, from this, in order to go to something else, you either have to minimize it or open another window up on top of it. As an example, let's just open up the App Store, and it comes up on top of it. And then to get back and forth, you have to switch, and that can be a little tedious, especially if you have a lot of things going on. If you're multitasking, you've got internet open, email open, you're enjoying some music on a streaming service, so on and so forth. Your windows can get pretty busy. Your desktops can get very busy. One of the things that I embraced a long time ago when using an Apple computer was this concept of different desktops. So if we go into the preferences and we look at mission control, what mission control does is it shows us all of our open windows for one, as well as what desktops they're on, and we can have multiple desktops. The easiest way to invoke this is to use hot corners. I've been using this since the beginning. I saw it in a tutorial somewhere, and what this is if you run your mouse to the top corner of the window of the desktop. In the case of mission control, if I go to the top left, it will bring up mission control. So what this is now doing is showing me that I have 4 desktops, and it's also showing me where each application is on the current desktop, or every open application on the current desktop, as well as letting me switch rapidly between desktops. So for example, if I come over here to desktop number 3, I've got a number of windows open, and they're kind of bunched together and they're a little difficult to find. But if I go back to mission control, it shows me, it spreads them out and lets me see them individually. I can also switch again to a different desktop. On this particular one, I'm working in DaVinci Resolve. I can go to a desktop that has nothing open currently and open up a new application. So you can see how you can separate your workflow into different areas. You can put the internet and research over here, email over here, social media over here. It becomes much easier to manage your workflow when you're using multiple desktops like this. And with a quick shortcut to get between them, such as this, it really maximizes efficiency. Another favorite of mine is if I'm working with virtual machines in the field when I'm programming customers' gear. I have to use Windows to talk to that gear, and so I'll start up a virtual machine, and what I'll do is I'll put it full screen on one of the desktops, and so that what I can then do is switch back and forth between, using the Mac host for any tasks that I'm conducting with email or internet, what have you, and then flip right over to Windows very quickly to continue programming and so forth. Really, really powerful tool. If you've never enjoyed this functionality, I urge you to give it a try. It's a little awkward at first. It's very new if you've never had it, but very quickly you'll realize how much it benefits you. I think you might like it. It might be worth trying out. Okay, so on a Mac, we find all of our files and organize all of our content through the use of the Finder. And there are some options that I like to set when using it. So Finder is the icon down here. On the dock, it's always on the far left, or always begins out on the far left. It's the one application that is essentially always open on a Mac. If you go up under Finder and then Preferences, a couple of things I like to do. I don't like all of the drives always showing on the desktop, so you can turn those on and off here. I do, however, like connected servers. It reminds me when I've connected to a network resource, so I just leave that one on. And you can kind of do this as you see, as kind of, matches your preferences there, but you can adjust that there. It kind of declutters the desktop. I set the default first open window as my home folder. You can choose from any number of things on the Mac, but I like it to open my home folder, which by default contains your documents, your downloads, your movies, music, and so forth. I also changed some things in the sidebar settings. I don't like recents showing up because, again, recents is constantly changing, and it's my habit to have things be uniform and kind of open up in the same type of view that I'm used to. So when recents is in play, it's very dynamic. It changes based on what you've been doing. So for me, it's easier to find things if content isn't constantly changing. So I turn recents off. I turn the options that I want to show in my sidebar always show up there. I turn them on. And again, you'll find through your use you may have some preference over you may not want to see the desktop icon. You can just turn it off. I don't use iCloud Drive, so I turn that off. I turn the locations on, and I also, the other thing you can do is here on the sidebar you can actually drag these to reorder them. My preference would be to see the locations at the very top and then the favorites. I do like the file name extensions to show. Also feel it's important to get a warning before I'm changing an extension inadvertently, because you can cause things to become inoperative. The other item that I do in Finder, and this is rather important to me, is I will go to the view options. I will set always open in column view. That is my preference. You can change your view right here, and I find that it's easiest for me to visualize where I am in the machine if I use column view. For example, if I go into one of my network attached storage here, each time I go to something new, it shows me kind of where I am, how I got to where I am. So essentially there's a visual path that's being displayed. And then when you get to the actual files at the end, it's going to show me a preview of what that file is. And you can quickly scroll through and see some previews of what's there. Various documents will show up as a preview there. But my preference is to use column view. Icons, and it just becomes too cluttered for me. It's easier for me to visualize everything when they're in nice neat lists and they're organized with they're grouped by kind. So under view options, I will pick always open in column view and browse in column view. I'll also group by kind and sort by name. This makes it much easier to find things. Things feel very chaotic when it's not structured in this manner. And to be completely truthful with you, I honestly don't use Finder. There's a third-party app that I put in. I have not yet put in this Mac. This is still a fairly new machine for me. It's called Pathfinder. And I find it to be more stable and organized. And these similar options that I choose here, I choose there. By default, when I do go to the Finder, I like these options to be configured this way. I find it much easier to use. Don't be afraid to play with these settings. It will have a big impact on how you organize your files and data in your computer, especially if you find yourself confused as to where you are in the computer. By moving things into what makes sense to you, the right order and the right grouping and sorting, you'll find it a lot easier. So those are just some examples of how I configure the Finder to make it easier for me to organize my data on the computer. So those are a few of my favorite customizations that I apply to every Mac that I use, and I find without them it's much more difficult to use the computer at all. I get a lot of customers that tell me the same thing, especially the ones that come from Windows. They have a challenge. They just can't seem to find where things are. This both makes it feel a little more familiar to them, as well as gives them an introduction on how customizable the system is. So again, I hope you find this helpful. If you have some of your favorite customizations, please by all means leave them in the comments. I'd love to try them out and see how it works for me. Thanks for checking out my videos, and you guys have an awesome day.